Okay, it's 4 minutes after 6. That's not bad.
Yeah.
Dang. I'm calling the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Can we establish a quorum?
Mr. Soyson?
Here.
Ms. Cheatwood? Here. Mr. Canali?
Here.
Mr. Wathers? Mr. Yo?
Here.
Mr. Hoff? Ms. Kirkner?
Here.
Commissioner Rothstein?
Here.
Secretary Eisenberg?
Here.
Mr. Chair, please let the record reflect that 6 members are present and we do have a quorum.
Okay, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do we have any changes on the agenda?
No.
Do I hear a motion to approve?
So.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And we are going to review and approve the minutes of January 15th. Are there any additions, corrections? Do I hear a motion?
Yes.
Second?
January 15th.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All right.
So is that the last time we'll have to approve minutes?
No. We always have to approve. She really stays on top of things. Probably the next.
No, I just assumed that the board was not doing written minutes anymore, that we would not either.
Oh, well, that's a good question now.
We can talk about that.
Do we want to follow the Board of Commissioners?
I would be okay with it.
How difficult is it for you to maintain minutes?
Not difficult
I'm sorry,
at
say
all.
again?
How difficult is it for you to maintain minutes?
Us personally, it's a breeze.
How
All the work
difficult
goes
is
on
it
over there.
for the commission to maintain minutes?
It's
She
not
probably
difficult.
just
If
looks
it
at.
is not difficult,
I
I would
think
think that it would be keeping the minutes to moving forward. Let us see how our decision is continuing to play out.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
this is how I use the minutes. When projects come back multiple years later, I'll forget what I had thought about the project, meaning little nuances, or Richard's out that day or something, and I want to make sure that the point that he had 3 years ago gets followed up with. Then I'll reread the minutes from back then and make sure that his line of questioning got answered or something.
Well,
So
what-
we do use the minutes
Correct.
in that way.
But with the understanding that minutes are not transcripts, nor are they are captured by those that are writing the minutes, so they may not be.
Thanks.
But they're approved by us.
No,
So
I
if
understand.
something was captured that we didn't really like, we said it the wrong way, or she captured it the wrong way,
My recommendation is you maintain minutes, and I think, see how, again, it plays out with the board's decision that we made in not maintaining minutes and going the path we're going. I'm not confident yet which way we're gonna go yet, and we may move back, so we'll see.
And if I
That's a
can
good
offer
point.
too, that when we send out, especially site and subdivision plans, we send what we call an excerpt from the minutes to the applicant, and that serves as their unofficial record of what was discussed. So we use it more than just for posting it on the website.
Right.
And also, I think getting back to when someone needs to search something, and we are always searching minutes for what
Right.
was discussed to go back, it's a lot easier to do a search on minutes than it is to have to watch video and pick something up. And again, I think to Commissioner Rothstein's point, I mean, it's not a transcript. We synopsize what's happening, but they are a good,
and sometimes it can be
Record.
written, a significant discussion about,
Correct.
then you know you've got to go back and watch the
Right.
tape. Because
Yes.
there was some meat to this that was different.
Yeah.
But that would be my recommendation right now, so.
Good recommendation.
I have no problems with that, keeping them, because I've used them on occasion myself, so. And it's easier than trying to go back to, first of all, you're gonna have to remember the date,
Right.
you know, so.
Yeah, if you've ever tried to find
Status quo.
something in the videos,
Yeah.
it takes a while.
Yes.
You know,
It's easy to skim the minutes and go to where you want to, where the issue is. In the video, you'd be moving it ahead and then moving it, went too far, moving back, so.
Status quo.
So let's just keep it the way it is. Okay, administrative report. Madam Secretary?
Welcome, everyone. We have not had a Wednesday evening meeting, I think, since August of 2018, so I hope everyone enjoyed their break. I don't like us to have a meeting just to have a meeting, so we always wait for there to be reasonable agenda items to have something established for you all. I mean, everyone values their time, especially after a long day of work. So again, I appreciate you all being here this evening. Just a few things in the administrative report I want to bring to your attention. New security measures. I'm wearing my ID badge. They want, during our Tuesday meetings, this door, which is our public open door, will no longer be unlocked for meetings on Tuesdays. You will have to come up through the upstairs, show ID, and let them know where you're going, and you will get a visitor's badge, and you will come down here to this meeting room. When you leave, the public will have to go out the same way and return their badge. You all have badges. You'll need to display those. When you come in, you're treated just like a county employee. Display your badge. You don't have to sign in or anything like that. For our nighttime meetings, this door will be unlocked, but we're going to ask that everyone that comes in to hear from the public signs in. I know sometimes people don't like to sign in, and typically if you're not speaking, we haven't required that in the past, but now given the new security measures, we're going to ask everyone from the public who attends to sign in at our meeting. So that way we can control access to the building. It's just part of increasing security efforts by the county. Also, in your packet for tonight is a draft of the preliminary recommended CIP Community Investment Program, our letter to the Board of County Commissioners regarding consistency requirement with the CIP and our master plans. If you recall, Ted Zaleski from Budget and Management came on January 22nd and you gave your presentation highlighting what the preliminary recommended budget is, as well as you got the preliminary recommended and the requested budget from the agencies. Staff has reviewed this and has found it consistent with our 2014 master plan, the 2018 community comprehensive plan, and our other area master and functional plans. And I cited multiple linkages directly to the plans. For instance, the continued funding for ag land preservation, which is one of our goals in the master plan, is to preserve 100,000 acres. The continuation of Market Street Extended, that's in the budget for construction, that's directly out of our plans. The Sheriff's Office precinct in Eldersburg is mentioned in the Freedom Community Comprehensive Plan. Doing a transportation master plan is listed in both the master plan and Freedom Plan, and then the Freedom Water and Sewer system improvements help support the activities and the recommendations also that's found in the Freedom Plan. So again, we also thank them for their support of the transportation master plan, getting the final remaining matching funds, and staff is excited to begin to kick off that project and hopefully work with a consultant to do that. So this is for the chair to sign. I don't know if you want to make a motion for your signature, if you just want to.
Do we have any changes or any additions?
Linda, what did you say, work with a consultant to do what?
Do the transportation master plan. We have funding for that we
Okay.
did a grant for.
I make
Everybody
a
okay
motion
with
that
it?
we forward this to the Board of County Commissioners as written. I think it's great.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
And then the last item I have for you is I wanted to give you all an update of the comprehensive rezoning process. Since later on the agenda, we are going to be reviewing a proposed text amendment for the IR district regarding breweries. So since you all have forwarded the proposed draft commercial, industrial, and employment campus zoning districts text portion to the Board of County Commissioners, we've had 3 work sessions with them, one in December and 2 in January. the work session format, it's a new format for the commissioners, much of like what we do here tonight, a little more informal. They don't take public comment. You all do take public comment during the work sessions. And the idea is to have a more in-depth conversation with the commissioners in this decision-making process. The comprehensive rezoning, the text portion is very detailed, and ultimately it's their legislation to adopt and implement. So it's really important that they have participation in drafting this. And I feel that this board, this planning commission, has given them a really good basis and a good start for their discussions. And Mary, back me up on this. I've seen very little change from what was originally submitted. From the original, there's no been sweeping changes so far discussed with the districts as you've sent them up. We have been drafting general notes and putting on our website under the comprehensive rezoning on also saying when the upcoming meetings are. So we have 3 more meetings scheduled for the month of February, February 12th, February 19th, 21st and 26th. It was originally the 19th, 21st and 26th. Trying to get 2-hour time blocks with the commissioners to go over this. We've done the proposed uses, we've done the use table, we've done the definitions of the districts, and now we've done accessory uses, and now we're moving on to bulk requirements. And then once the bulk requirements are finished, that'll complete the text portion for that. So hopefully 1 or 2 more meetings, and then hopefully the 3rd meeting we will be able to talk about process for how the board would move forward on adopting the text. Some public outreach meetings, perhaps. I think that would be advisable, so that way if there's any major overarching issues, you don't want that to come out at the public hearing. We can address them ahead of time, and then a public hearing, and then adoption. And during that time, we would also be scoping out then the map changes that need to occur as well. So that's where that process is. Internally, residential, we've been working with the concept team. We're going to have some new material in the next few weeks to send to the residential focus group. I know many members are anxious to get some new material, but we have been working through things. And with any parallel effort, as much as we want to move forward on the residential, commercial things are still coming up. So during the work session, we've had some commercial discussions that we've had to go back to our concept team that might have been allotted time for the residential to go back and do some additional discussion and research to bring back to the commissioners during. We have only one concept team internally doing both, so it's kind of hard to have, split meetings to talk about commercial and then moving forward residential. So we're trying as best we can to move both efforts forward simultaneously. But I think it's going well. I mean, Commissioner Ross, do you have anything to add as far as the work session? Is it painful or?
No, it's not painful at all. It's
Yeah,
going very well. It's very deliberate in our approach. We're focused on the task at hand, not the time spent. So if it goes past 2 hours, we will go past 2 hours, or we'll stop where we're at and pick up, the following work session. So we're not focused on getting this chapter done by this time. And I think we're getting some really good dialogue, some very candid conversation. I really appreciate the professionalism of the staff and the work they're doing along with the other commissioners in the engagements. We all have our, I won't say pet peeves, but focused areas. And I think we're able to collaborate well with the staff. So more to follow on that. And
That's good to hear.
yeah, it really is. Did you have anything else? Or?
No, that's all I have with regards to that.
So I was going to highlight that as well, as again, being relatively new into this role, my impressions on the staff and the community focused on this type of effort, and it's a very deliberate approach, which I appreciate. The second piece is the evening meetings, although could be I won't say uncomfortable, but not the best for everybody that does have long days and works, but they are appropriate for the community as well, to, if they want to participate, those that cannot be here during the mornings or full days, at least in the evenings. If we do these, they're valued by the community, at least giving an outreach, you know. You can't fix everything all the time, but, you know, I do appreciate at least the sentiment of having these type of evening meetings. And then the third and last is, you know, it is formal that Linda is the director.
Thank you.
We took the acting off of director.
Thank you, thank
And,
you.
you know, really appreciate, again, the commissioners coming together and making that decision in moving forward, and Linda being now the director of planning and zoning.
We fully support.
Yeah,
I appreciate
we
that.
agree.
Thank
So,
you.
Cool. Life's good.
Anything else?
No, that's all I have in my administrative report this evening.
All right, we will go to item 7, public comment. I see very little public here. So we'll move on to item 8, the bicycle pedestrian master plan.
Would you like to turn the lights off?
I think we should.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, good evening. So today we are, I have Chapter 8, discussion and decision for you. Chapter 8 was originally brought to you in December. We just did an introduction. And then today, or this is our progress right here. We have in progress Chapter 8. Chapters 1 and 2 are still left to be brought to you, and we're thinking in April. Those will be before you, as well as the whole document. So just the goals of Chapter 8. We have prioritized some of the key connections that were identified in Chapters 3 and 4. Those are our adopted plan and future connections. We want to leverage state and federal funding for improvements to existing and construction of new infrastructure. And then we also want to engage elected officials, government agencies, and the community on issues related to bike ped training and outreach. An overview of Chapter 8. We identify criteria to consider when implementing bike ped infrastructure. We use the goals of this plan to prioritize our projects, the same ones that were proposed in Chapters 3 and 4, and these are the county projects, not municipal. We identify barriers to construction of bike ped infrastructure and then solutions to those barriers. And the barriers can include anything from land acquisition, maintenance, floodplains, utility, easements, right-of-way. And then we use the 5 E's of planning to keep our elected officials and citizens engaged when it comes to bike ped issues. We received comments, so after introducing this in December, I had sent out for comments to all of our municipalities and some agencies. And we received comments from the following agencies, and they were all fairly minor comments. The 2 biggest changes that we made to the plan in between introduction and now, the 2040 Bike Ped Master Plan, the Maryland plan, was completed in January. So I went ahead and made some updates using the new plan. And I did actually keep a little bit of the 2014 plan. In 2014, they conducted a survey, and I think they had between 3,000 and 4,000 respondents to that survey. And their 2040 update, or the January update, I only found a survey that had about 50 responses. And I actually emailed our SHA contact to find out just informational. I want to know how they got so many responses in 2014 versus only 50 now, because I know we have a little bit of trouble trying to get people to take our surveys and just like get out and, you know, get feedback and everything. So that was one major update we made. And then the other one, I don't think you saw the maps last time, our 4 priority maps. So I included those in your packets. So those are pretty much the two major changes. Everything else is pretty minor. And then we have our recommendations. Some of the key recommendations are to create a bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee. I'm pretty sure all of our surrounding counties have those committees. And we could learn a lot from what they've done.
And who creates that? Just the commissioners ask for, okay, like any other committee we have?
Yes.
Okay.
Coordinate bike ped accommodations with other projects that may require road-related construction improvements, so site plans, that kind of stuff. And then make sure the public is aware and keep that as a top priority for when we construct any infrastructure that's near a roadway.
So that first recommendation, I guess I was wondering about that. So that's something that we would also, like the Department of Planning would look, so when you receive a site plan, would you give this to them?
Yes, so they're
okay.
really responsive about that, and actually, development review, I mean, so none of this really has the force of all, like a comprehensive
Right, I
master
understand,
plan.
but it's got a lot of information
Correct,
and
so
recommendations.
development review does do that with the
Okay.
Freedom Bike Ped Plan, when there's a site plan that comes forward, and they see something that's in the Freedom Plan, they'll ask them to consider this, look, it's in our,
Okay.
you know, we'd like to see this move, now we can't like force them to do it until, if the decision is made to incorporate this plan by reference into the county master plan, which is something I would actually recommend doing,
Right.
then this would have the force of the county master plan behind
Okay,
it, saying
so that was the biggest thing I was wondering.
yes, yes.
Okay.
But I think that would be a step that we would do, a succinct update to
Sure.
the county master plan for that, and I would also recommend the transportation master plan.
Okay.
So not to get ahead of things, actually Claire and I had this discussion this afternoon, saying that when that plan is done, maybe that would be a good time to open the master plan for both of these to be adopted by reference into the countywide master plan. And that would give it more gravitas behind it for projects.
Good, okay.
All right, and then some more key recommendations. Create design guidelines to expand the countywide bike ped network. Collaborate with our municipalities to create complete streets policies within the growth areas. And then work with key stakeholders to implement a safety and awareness campaign.
I assume that we're working with the municipalities with their plans to coordinate so that we, you know, if we have a path right next to where the municipality starts, that they will continue it.
Yep, so I am getting there.
We're all jumping ahead.
That's good. We're all on the same
Right.
page.
So actually right now, over the past, I want to say 2 months, I've been going around to all the municipalities because they've already all approved their, the text that was, and the maps, all the information that pertained to their town or city. And right now, similar to what is done with the water and sewer master plan, I'm going around to all of the towns and getting a letter of certification signed by their planning commission, basically saying that the information provided in these chapters is consistent with their municipal comp plan.
Okay.
So I actually have been, I think I've been to 5 out of the 8 towns. So, and that's going very, very smooth. Chapters 1 and 2, I think we'll bring before you, I'm hoping in April, as well as the full document. And then once that's accepted, we'll begin a 60-day review. And we're not exactly doing a state clearinghouse formal process, but
it's not required by state law for us to do a clearinghouse review. I actually asked them as a favor from the clearinghouse to say, would you mind processing this like a comprehensive or master plan? And the reason for this is that if there's something from some of our some of the state departments, like Department of the Environment or State Highway or MDOT, that hasn't been caught in some of these preliminary reviews, this would be like that last official checkoff that we've reviewed it, it looks good. So we just want to do that as an extra measure of comfort to know that we've considered everything and we're not doing anything to impede the state's progress or other agencies, that we weren't aware of something happening. And then we can say everyone looked it over and checked it off.
You'd be able to write that in the addition to the master plan?
Yes.
It's been sent and
Yes,
approved by them?
well, so we'll do that then, but actually when we go back and do the master plan, you have to do the clearinghouse.
Okay.
60-day review would be
Required process
required.
for that stuff.
Yes, that is required. But they're doing this kind of as a favor
Sure.
to us to help process. They don't mind doing it anytime you ask. For something that's legitimate like this,
Right.
they don't mind doing that effort.
Plus the way the path is, they're gonna see it again,
Yep, exactly.
so, good.
Yep, so during those 60 days, I think we're gonna do a couple small public outreach meetings, maybe at some libraries. And then at the end, we'll do a public hearing in this room.
I think we're gonna do a planning commission public hearing at one of our evening meetings to just say that we did that, just to get any official comments for a record is why we would be doing this, to establish a record.
Hasn't been very controversial, has it?
No, it's been really well received and kind of, actually, I'm gonna go back to when we did our original surveys a couple years ago. We had like all-time records, like several hundred people took the surveys. I mean, it really was a great response, and it's been really well received through the public. And I think part of it is it's a fun document. I mean, people want to see this happen. It's good for the communities. It's good for economic development to see us thinking of these terms. And we've also done a little more creative outreach with like pop-up events. And we held the photo contest where we gave out a prize to race pace bikes. And even one of the outreach meetings we thought about is like during the Westminster Wine Stroll, having a booth or table set up, reaching out to the library and making it, people will come more to that, and it just makes it a more personable type of community document, so.
Well, there's a couple of organizations that are pretty active as well in the county, that, some biking organizations.
And we've had good partnerships too, with like Healthier Carol, the hospital, so they're really excited to see something like this move forward. Rec and Parks, we've been good partners with a lot of people. And I owe it all to Claire, she's really done a great job picking this up from Nokomis and working with Nokomis while she was here.
That's great.
So once we approve chapters 1 and 2, then the 60-day period would start then?
As soon as, well, 1 and 2 is going to be with the entire document, so part of the full document acceptance will include 1 and 2 then. And so once you guys are good with it and you've said.
1 and 2 is the last ones we have to approve.
Yeah, but we're going to do that all as part of the full document.
Okay.
So you don't have to, we don't want to nickel and dime you any further
right.
with that. So we're going to give you the whole document in its entirety, but 1 and 2 will be new to
Okay.
you then. And then once Planning Commission gives it stamp of approval, then we'll begin a more formal, quote unquote, public review process.
Okay.
I think that was it. Are there any questions?
I think we've interrupted you along the way enough that we've
Nothing left for the end. Okay.
Good job.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great job. Thank you.
Yes.
Because I don't know the yellow is.
I mean, I learned tons. I didn't realize there were so
I
many
didn't
grants.
realize that.
Yeah.
There were so many grants and funding up.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this will really give us the ability to tap into that, having a plan to lean on,
You said
really.
that, but we couldn't do it because you were,
Yep. Because they don't know then the level of commitment by the jurisdiction. I'm giving you a grant, and what's your level, where are you going with this? So that's really helpful in leveraging funding.
All right, we will go to item 9, text amendment, introduction of IR district breweries.
So tonight is an introduction for a text amendment to the restricted industrial zone for the allowance of breweries. On December 21st, the Board of County Commissioners received a letter from St. John's Properties requesting this text amendment to the IR district. On January 17th, we went before the board asking for their direction. And as per our county code, the text amendment needs to be recommended to the Planning Commission, or sent to the Planning Commission for your recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So in front of you in your packet, you should have a letter from Schaefer and Schaefer. And I think how they set it up is they put the entire IR district text in here, and then the blue text is the insertion of the breweries, microbreweries language that they would like to see added for this text amendment. So pages 4 and 5 are the only place I believe where that text is mentioned, but they gave you, we printed everything out that they gave us as they presented it. And then you also received a slight synopsis from us in terms of Chapter 158 zoning regulations and how this would compare to what you all have already forwarded for the I-1 district up to the Board of County Commissioners. So just a couple of things to keep in mind as we move through this. The board already has a proposal for new zoning for the industrial districts, and we're moving from IR and IG to I1 and I2. What has been proposed for I1 is somewhat different than what the text amendment being referenced is here. So if the recommendation is going to be different from what you've already forwarded to the board, then reconciliation will have to occur at the board level as we move forward with the proposal that they have for the current I-1 and I-2. So with that in mind, we have just a brief presentation to kind of go over some of this. This is the comparison of the amendment. So the IR proposal, so this is our current, this is the proposal on the current IR zone. That breweries and microbreweries, provided that such operations be in compliance with any and all local and state liquor laws, licensing requirements, and health department regulations, and shall possess any and all licenses which may be required by Carroll County and or the state of Maryland.
Now, are there things that actually fall into that? Are the microbreweries and breweries licensed by and governed by local and state laws and
Yes.
requirements?
Yes.
I know the health department weighs in on some of the things as far as people and things, but some of it sounded at one point like it was.
It is, and that's with the definite, or the proposal that you all had forwarded as the draft, we defined small scale, which this is being referred to as microbreweries here, in terms of gallons of barrels produced, and that was kind of the cutoff point for that.
Now that is, so microbrew is, because we only have a definition for small scale, so that's supposed to be microbrew?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Well,
and that's what,
But we deliberately, when we gave it to you, did not call them microbreweries.
Okay.
We called them small scale because microbrewery, the more we researched it, it's a term that's used not necessarily in Maryland law, but in other ways
So in
differently.
Maryland law, it's called small scale?
No, it's called microbreweries, but it's defined as the 22,500 barrels per year. So we made those identical. We just called it small scale.
Okay.
I mean, you could go back to calling it microbrewery. As a group, we thought that was clearer, just because if you pick up any publication about this, it's going to say different things are microbreweries, not necessarily in the state of Maryland.
It also got a bit confusing because what's the size of a barrel? As there's two different standard barrels, measures that are being used, so that also came into conversation.
And I think if we need to, we can nail that down.
Yeah.
We can say as consistent with Maryland state.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think that would be
Just to
a
be
good-
sure the two are
That
tight.
would be a good thing, just because again, there's different standards for barrels.
If we're gonna use
Now,
the-
do you
we're gonna
think
use the
Maryland
standard
will
there, we need
change
to
this
define it.
22,000?
And they
Do
could.
we need to be so specific, or do we just say as defined in Maryland
well,
law?
so then that fluctuates a lot. So it's what do you and what does the board want this to be? So if you allow it up to Maryland law, that could change. And so what you have set today could be much larger. I think, wasn't it, the best practice or best standard was 15,000, but Maryland's a little more generous at the 22.5.
So it could change, and one concern with that is you're also allowing, and that's why it's difficult with this kind of narrow amendment, you're also allowing the small-scale microbreweries in the commercial districts. So that's why it was nailed down as 22.5, because if the state does go bigger, that might not be something
You wanna stay
zoning-wise you
consistent.
wanted to see in your C2 and C3 districts.
Okay. I'm trying to think where I see breweries at. I guess they all are industrial.
Where?
In ag, yeah. Local, other counties.
In other
Like Flying
counties or
Dog and
in
Frederick
Maryland?
is in industrial.
All the ones I've been in Baltimore County are industrial.
Frederick County, That's industrial,
Mhm,
dogfish?
It's an
that's-
industrial park.
Dogfish,
Really?
flying dog.
Flying dog.
Flying dog.
is, okay, and then what about Jailbreak in Howard County?
Industrial.
Is that
And
industrial?
Howard's all in like an industrial
Okay.
complexes.
But you're starting to see them more and more.
Right.
In the
Even in
commercial.
And I
Baltimore
think
City,
Baltimore County has the
you
new
see 'em
rural
there.
one now, the out like in Moncton or Sparks or something like that.
And
No,
then
the
other
BC
counties
Brewery's in
popping
an
up.
industrial park.
That's the Hunt Valley one.
Yeah, Hunt Valley.
No, but there's another one there's another new one that's like now
But then,
like in the
it
rural.
it may be appropriate in a commercial C3.
Yeah, C3.
Which is what you recommended to the
Yeah,
board.
you recommended that.
And
So again,
which
this
is why
is,
we separated out small scale from regular and defined it.
Made sense, okay.
so this is what you saw with this is your recommendation to the board that they are discussing currently. So in the IR amendments, now going back to current zoning, the IR amendment, when associated with a brewery or microbrewery and pursuant to section 158.079, allowing for tasting rooms, accessory food sales to accompany the beverage tasting, retail sales facilities for the sale of novelty and gift items related to the beverage, guided tours and promotional activities. And then the I-1 draft just allows for the consumption or tasting of alcohol produced on-site at a brewery or small-scale brewery, provided that the area for this purpose does not exceed 49% of the total building. Again, because that gets over, if you're having more of these retail sales, servicey things in your industrial, at what point does it tip over from being industrial to more commercial retail service based? And that's why that 49% was put in there.
And that was somewhat at the request of the zoning administrator on an enforcement, from an enforcement aspect. Not that he would go in and be able to measure, but when something is being permitted, it would determine how much parking was needed based on what the inside of the building was being used for. So in general, an accessory use in general should be less than half of the entire use. So that was pretty much at his request, and we all did agree with it at the time. That is not included in the proposal before you.
So these are just some of the major differences between the two. That microbrewery is not defined in the proposal that's been brought before you. So at a minimum, you may want to consider having microbrewery or small scale defined as we did before. The IR amendment only adds its use to the IR, not the commercial districts. So again, this is very narrowly focused to the one district. Planning Commission proposal limits the accessory use, as we said again, to that 49% of the floor area. And there's no limit, it seems, on the amendment that's been brought before you. And then the IR amendment specifically mentions food, retail sales, guided tours, promotional activity, all that stuff, language that's identical to the language adopted last year that we had in the farm alcohol producers. If you recall that, that was brought forward with the ag district. So that's pretty much the gist of it. Tonight was to introduce this to you all and have some discussion about your thoughts on how to move forward. And we could make a recommendation at our next planning commission meeting during our work session. A business meeting to finalize things. So what are the thoughts here?
Well, for one, I think we should keep commercial 3 in here, and what they've proposed, it's just industrial, right?
Correct. So this is just for our current IR text. So all of the commercial industrial employment campus that they have forwarded, that's what they have forwarded to them. There's no new recommendation for that. You're looking at what's existing on the ground today.
So this can occur immediately.
Correct, this is on the current IR.
Okay.
But going back to that, if there's fundamental things that come out of this that actually change how the I-1 would then work, because the IR is essentially becoming I-1, then that will have to be reconciled with the commissioners prior to the adoption of that text, because what we don't want to have happen is this gross mismatch of the two zoning districts.
So, is there any discussion, any additional discussion about the 49%? why it's more controversial and not included?
By the applicant?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to have them come up and
Love to.
they're here today.
Yeah.
Your father would have been up here.
Yeah, well, I was
He would have signed up from the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a little bit more confined than
do the part.
some
Yeah,
properties,
yeah. So, this is Kelly Schaefer with Schaefer and Tom Peeling with St. John's Properties.
Good
And they are
evening.
the ones who proposed this text amendment.
Yes. Would you like me to
Yeah, just
explain
jump in,
just
tell us
briefly?
whatever you want.
So what initiated this request is that St. John Properties has a tenant who is actually interested in starting a brewery. And as you all know, there's an undefined timeline for when the new text will be adopted. So even if the new text would adequately provide for this new tenant, that prevents them from being able to lease to them anytime, you know, within a period where that tenant will lock in and say, yes, this works for me. So that was the initiation for the request for the text amendment. And I will just say that, you know, having, like, I am familiar with the state alcoholic beverage laws and regulations and the terminology of brewery and microbrewery and all of these things and how they play out in the state. So the request here is in the IR district, but you're correct, in the new text, the small scale breweries, which equate in the state to a microbrewery currently, are going to be allowed, assuming the text goes through, in all the commercial districts. So as the text is now, not considering the new proposed text, the only place that a brewery would be allowed is in the IG district as manufacture and production of alcoholic beverages. So this would specifically allow breweries or microbreweries in the IR and adopts the same accessory language as the farm alcohol production ag text that you recently adopted. That also matches with what breweries are allowed to do under their state licensing. So promotional events, tours, all of those are specifically defined in the state alcoholic beverage statutes. So those are all things that, you know, arguably, without including the accessory use language, they could do anyways, but I just thought it cleaned it up to include that in the accessory use language in the IR district.
Kelly, you just said all commercial districts.
Yes.
That's
I
not-
think small scale is
That's not
proposed
what we're
in
doing.
all
Oh,
C.
proposed, yes,
Proposed.
in the text in front of the
Is it
commissioners right
C1,
now.
C2, and
That's
C3?
for, it's just for,
Yeah, not
No,
C1, C2.
no, it's just C3.
C3 and I1.
I think it's C, is it
I
C2
believe it's
now?
C2, C3,
Yeah,
I
that's-
want, and
that's
I2.
C1.
But that's where they differentiate between small scale and breweries.
But the point is, you said all commercial, and we're not proposing this in C1.
Okay, thank
I
you for the
believe
clarification,
it's C2,
Commissioner.
C3 from my memory,
Clarify that.
along with
Yeah,
I1.
I don't have the text with me,
I'm
but
pretty amazed if I remember that correctly, to be honest.
I'm
So,
amazed.
No, actually, as we proposed it, we did put it in the C1,
Yeah.
thinking that the size of the
Small
property
scale.
would limit, it could be very small
Right.
scale in that
A
case.
restaurant with one, yeah.
Well, it shouldn't be that, it should,
Right.
the restaurant should be the accessory part, but that was something maybe the commissioners wanted to discuss further. As proposed, it was shown in the C1.
okay, I apologize. I think we do need to revisit that at C1. I don't
In my head,
remember
too, I
it
don't
being in
remember
C1.
I think we went through
I
that.
think we keep going back, like in
Yeah.
our minds too.
There-
We've had
there-
many
There
debates.
are a few topics that we keep going back, and like I
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
we're doing this to task, not to time, so let's
Okay.
relook at that and bring that back to
Could
us.
do that on
I would
Tuesday.
appreciate that.
Are you
So-
talking, are you saying C2 or
My
C2?
impression was C2, C3, I1 was the,
And EC.
And I2 also.
is it?
and that too, yeah.
No, not I2.
Oh, not
It's
I2.
not I2, but
Right.
employment campus.
Right.
Employment
But
campus.
my
And that's
impression
only-
was C2, C3, and I1. I didn't know
Because
about-
that's,
Yeah,
it's
Alex.
also just,
Alex.
just to clarify, brewery, under the proposed text, is just the industrial districts.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
And brewery small scale
Right.
is
Okay.
just the commercial districts.
But.
So that's the proposed text.
Yes.
And the key focus again of this definition was, you know, per their request, allowing St. John Properties to also focus their attention on what's happening, you know, in Liberty Exchange. That's what we're talking about.
So, let me get this straight. So, if we approve what they're talking about, once we go through is that what the commissioners are then gonna wanna follow, or are we gonna follow what we recommended?
Commissioners have both pieces of information, they
Yeah.
make their decision.
We have to approve it. It's one of these things, it went through us to come to you, to come back to us for approval.
Yeah, now, I understand why you wanna do it
Right.
before, because it will take a while
Right.
for us to get through that, so I understand that. I'm just concerned about, we make these changes for this, but then go,
But we don't necessarily have to make all of their proposed
Well,
changes.
No.
We can allow it.
You could say
keep
the
it consistent.
recommendation for IR is to be what you recommended for I1, and just say, and put the language that was in the blue and what we presented to you.
Right.
and if they're
Or-
still able to do it
But
then.
Exactly.
your concern is
Well-
valid,
Yeah.
that we can open up Pandora's box.
That's what I'm
That's
afraid.
your biggest concern, and trust me, I am very guarded about that as well. We've had a lot of discussion about that. We are being very judicious and very guarded on how we are making these decisions where we're not opening up Pandora's box and making exceptions to exceptions, exemptions to exemptions. So the intent of the board is to address this issue and then move forward with the definitions and not.
Hoping that there won't
Well,
be any more
but how-
text
but how-
amendment
No,
requests.
How would it, because this is just the IR, so I mean,
No,
we're
no,
very, very
no,
specific.
but the fact that we're making it, we're looking at an approval before we get,
Right,
there's a chance that other people.
that's correct.
Oh, you guys did it, heck, I want to get mine in there too.
No,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
correct, but it comes to the Board of Commissioners, and then we decide whether
They
we'll
just,
take it
yeah,
up or
right.
not.
And that is a discussion that the
I believe-
commissioners did
So you're
have.
gonna take a case
Their
by
last
case
meeting.
basis.
We are taking absolutely case by case, and we are very guarded on not taking any case just to take.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit stronger than just a hope that this doesn't, but also is encouraging us to move forward with these work sessions
No, I
and the
yeah.
definitions and continue to be moving forward. But I think this is a valid one. I recommend presenting it, and we had a long discussion, and with the intent that we guard ourselves from Pandora's box, so.
Yeah, so one of the issues that we have with text amendments in general is they're almost always initiated in this way, and they're case-specific.
Right.
However, it's not good form to write codes based on specific properties. So while it's coming from them,
Right.
and you want to tailor the answer to them, you also have to take that step back away from them.
That's correct.
Disregard this and
Right.
say, okay, what's best for everybody? And make
That's
sure
right.
you didn't just draw the line right behind the door for them.
Right.
And that you excluded somebody else. So I always look at this as shining a spotlight on a topic that should be discussed, but at some point stepping back away from this applicant
specific
and these
property.
specific people and just saying, okay,
Yeah.
where should we be here?
Yeah,
Likely, we end up in the same place.
and we did.
But
We,
I wouldn't mention
yeah,
St. John property and this
Right.
and saying, well, what capacity do you need and what square footage are you going to have? Because at some point, they shouldn't be at the table when it comes to your decision,
right.
in my opinion.
No, it's valid. And
Sorry,
it
guys.
was just, no,
No,
It's just
I
good
mean,
form, it's
yeah,
not-
right, and we understand.
I do, I appreciate it, and it was brought to our attention. It was thought through whether we want to take this up or not, and that was the first step. But it was looking at it beyond one property and looking at how are we going to be changing these definitions. And, yeah, so we kind of we walked through the steps you presented.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And just, for clarification, obviously this text amendment, we acknowledge will apply to the entire IR district and not just to St. John's properties. And, so in keeping with the other permitted uses in the IR, we do think it's consistent and it's not like a red herring that's just thrown in there. Medical cannabis, dispensary production, all of that's allowed in the IR. There are other very, very heavy uses, arguably heavier than a brewery, that are allowed. So I wouldn't say that this is inconsistent with the text that currently exists. And we do have, I know of at least one brewery that's developed in the IG district. So this would create a little bit more opportunity. Breweries do, thrive off of more breweries, so it does bring increased economic development when you can have more than just one in the county. I can't speak about the municipalities, but I know some of them have recently been adopting text amendments to allow for breweries in some of their business zones, and industrial zones as well. It's kind of just keeping up with the times, because I'm sure that when this initial text was drafted, not the proposed text, but the original text, the word brewery isn't in there once. So clearly it was never, it just wasn't a contemplated use at the time. It was manufacture and production of alcohol.
Frankly, it was a long time ago that it was written.
Right. So, I mean, it's an up-and-coming use. It's an up-and-coming demand, and I've had contact from multiple clients who are interested in breweries either in the municipalities or within the county. And so, I think it's an opportunity. I think it is, in keeping, it's a hard or challenging task to balance the zoning code with the alcoholic beverage code of the state of Maryland.
Yes.
So that's one of the things that needs to be kept in mind as well. When we say brewery and microbrewery or small scale brewery in our zoning code, what does that mean? How is that interpreted if we then look at the alcoholic beverage section? So we also did take that into account in drafting this and looking at that as well.
And so from our perspective, I don't know that in our discussions, my synopsis of this group is that we have a sense for it or truly care. And what I mean is, what we're looking at is, what's the implication of 22,500? How does this look? How does this fit into the community? It could be 36, might look the same, it could be 12.
And that's part of the problem. It does often look the same.
We don't have a quantifiable way of looking at that. What we're looking at is, okay, what's the implication to a 22.5 here, and what's the overall square footage and traffic, and what's this going to do to the area? But I don't know that we've got anything to argue that it should be 18.2 or something. There's some of those things.
Can I offer something on that? We actually had this conversation with the prospective tenant, and because I asked the exact question, I said, they're looking right now at language that would ultimately make it 22.5. Could you live with that? And his response was that the brewing equipment that you use at the scale that they're talking about right now, to get to that over the 100,000, which is one of the thresholds at the state, you really have to, it's very different equipment. So there's practical limitations to the equipment that they're using that kind of imposes that, whether it's 22 or 60 or, the number, but there's some practical limitations to what they're doing there. And that's what and I'm not an expert in it at all, but
what was his answer to that question?
No, that was his answer to the question, was that whether it was 22.5 or 60, I mean, it's, when you get to that 100,000 threshold that the state sets forth, it's somewhere in that range. As you come up to that 100,000, that the equipment changes, and they have to do something different to be able to meet that kind of a threshold of production.
So he could live.
And I think that's why they.
22.5.
Well, part of the problem, maybe not problem, but part of the balance of the zoning code and the state alcoholic beverage code is that a Class 5 brewery license allows you to produce more than 22,500 barrels per year, but it gives you things that you can't get under the microbrewery license. So a lot of people want the Class 5, which gives them more capacity, even if they're not using that capacity.
Can you explain some of the differences of what you get?
Yes, they get promotional, I brought the whole text with me. I've actually been reading through it closely recently. But they get promotional activities that they can do, they get tours, and they get the ability to have a tasting room. A microbrewer cannot apply to the county for a Class D license and have a tasting room. So even though this is a discussion to be had with the commissioners as well, but even though we're allowing for small scale breweries in the commercial districts, theoretically with the intent that they'll have tasting rooms in retail, they can't. Under their state license, they cannot have a tasting room. So under a Class 5, they can. So even if they're only brewing 10,000 barrels per year, they might want a full Class 5 license, which technically allows them the capacity.
So they don't have to.
Right, they don't have to, but they could, and so that's a zoning administrator interpretation question. Okay, if they're not, how do they prove that they're not using their full capacity? How do they prove that they're meeting the 22.5? It's
So is that
a
why you
balancing game.
felt this was needed in the code, the tasting room and the promo and all the others?
Well, I felt like it mirrored the state text, and it also mirrors the farm alcohol production text. So I just felt like it was a good clarification. I honestly, from a legal perspective, I think if you're allowing a brewery in there, arguably a tasting room is an accessory use without it being spelled out.
Sure, I guess, what is staff's view that, I mean, this seems pretty, I mean, I kind of agree, it seems like maybe it should be included in even our newer I-1.
Sure, the only issue was whether or not you're limiting it to the 49%. Because then it is subject to interpretation, and Jay did feel strongly he needs some guidance on at what
And that's
point
true, he does need
this
some,
stuff
yes.
takes over the actual production.
Definitive.
Right.
Yes.
I mean,
So
there
those
is-
are the two
Can I
big
put something on
differences,
that
is
as
the
well?
49%, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, like, 49, are you done with the 49?
49% was a major difference between the two proposals, as well as including the definition. I think from staff's perspective, those are the two things. As far as allowing breweries and microbreweries in the IR, which will be the I-1, it's identical. We planned all along on allowing them, so it's not so much the allowance of them as it is, again, defining it and then defining what an accessory use is. So.
How do you
Can I
feel
offer
about
something on the 49%? So we actually have a tenant in Baltimore County who is just putting together one of these facilities, and they're just finishing their build out. I believe they've started their brewing now. And I actually talked to our space planning people the other day, the ones that actually lay out the space for them and design and all that. And one of the things that particular tenant wanted and was able to get the permit for was an outside seating area. And when you added that to the space, it exceeded the 50%. And I suspect that it's going to be a similar. We've talked to others who wanted to do events in some of our other buildings and things like that. There seems to be a culture in the way that these things happen, what people would expect. So I would suggest that 49%, I guess it's a nice number to have. You may want to perhaps suggest that the staff, if you haven't already had the opportunity to do so, you might look at some of these operations and see how they function and how the floor space actually
Well, as a matter of
plays
fact, with
itself out.
Flying Dog, though, they don't even allow food. Flying Dog has no food.
Yeah,
They
it's
only
not
have
about, it's not about
Not allowed
food, it's about, like, they have an outdoor
Okay, but
patio
tasting
and
areas
things
are
like
The
that.
tasting area is
brewery,
short,
the tasting
and I could
area
find
is
out that
huge.
percentage,
I
but
think-
we've seen it, it's less than the
I
production
think the
area.
I
difference,
totally
though,
think there's a field
is
trip there,
Yeah, but
guys.
flying,
Union Hot Dog, right down on 31. No,
no.
there's no way that Flying Dog is
They
small
are, I mean,
scale.
they're
No,
everywhere.
they're
But we'd have to go to more than
We're,
one.
we're looking at the brewers too.
Oh, okay.
Part of the problem, if I can jump in about the accessory use and the 49%, would be that for maybe Budweiser, that's totally, like, you want to limit your tasting room, because you've got a massive manufacturer. But for some of these people, if we're trying to encourage the small scale guys, their production area might not be that big. And then if we're limiting them to 49% of that, as their, our county liquor board currently has a Class D, which is the license you would get if you were a brewery and not a full restaurant. They have a 7,000 square foot premises limitation. So, and they have the ability to also place those restrictions on that area. I'm not suggesting that that's the same as an accessory use, obviously, but there are other ways, and I will also suggest that there's much case law about accessory uses and how they're determined to be accessory and what makes them accessory, and there's some train of thought that thinks the 49% is a good rule across the board for all accessory uses, but sometimes that doesn't make sense. Sometimes it is very case specific, and depending on your square footage or whatever of the space that's being defined, 49% might kill your small brewery with having their
Right.
tasting room.
Is what Jay wants something that's quantifiable and easier for him to
But
objectively?
I would say
measure?
it's not
two
just
things.
Jay.
It's two
I don't
things.
wanna-
It's taking,
Yeah.
the thought was that, we wanted to make the original premise, even rewinding all the way back, was that we wanted industrial to be more industrial-like, the I-1 and I-2, and kind of remove some of the more commercially aspects to it, because of, the Walmarts coming in where we had I-1 and things like that. So then with regards to this, the thought was, well, if we want to keep it more industrial, it was that percentage to say, okay, you haven't quite tipped over to that commercial realm, you're still mostly manufacturing of some sort, producing of some sort. That was really like the principle upon which this came out of, was thinking in terms of, okay, here's the rules of engagement everyone set out, and you know, not trying to be rigid, but trying to keep within those columns.
And if a restaurant
yeah.
isn't permitted in the new I-1 and something is 60% restaurant and 40%
Yeah.
manufacturing, Jay does have a problem.
Yeah.
Because then somebody can say, well, we're a brewery, and he's gonna look at it, and how's he gonna?
Yeah.
If they're two permitted uses, it works out just fine. Like in the commercial districts,
Yeah.
it wouldn't really matter. They're both gonna be permitted, so it wouldn't matter. But in the industrial districts.
Yes, and
I don't
parking
wanna speak for
requirements
him.
change and things like, that was the other thing, problematically site plan review, they were,
Right.
these were things that were brought up by development review and zoning administrator, that from like a site plan perspective, as far as parking requirements and things like that go, how they would look at it differently, and so,
And maybe it would help to have Jay in play.
Yes.
When you consider this again.
I think you just want to be careful not to set up a situation that requires a variance every time that you get the use.
Yeah.
And that's why I say if you
I
look at.
totally agree with that.
Yeah, if you look at what the
Because that's
situation
been
is.
the issue
Right.
for years, is all
Yeah.
these variances.
Right, and
Look
this
at the
is
industry
so
practice
new.
and
Well,
try to
it's
get a
text
sense of what it
amendments, by
is.
the way.
So what I'm hearing
That's all I
is,
would caution.
I'm hearing that this is a highly regulated industry by outside organizations and things that, regardless of what we say, are gonna trump some of this and be the
Yes, they
limiting
have the
factor.
final say.
And variable. So, again, our perspective is based on its impact on the community, summing it up sort of in generalities. And, I mean, how many square footage it takes to do 2,000 barrels a month, we don't know if that's 3,000 or 8,000.
Right.
So I'm struggling with why the code would end up being the limiting variable at all, and why I know you're coming in asking for a dog, but maybe you end up with a pony. Because from my perspective, if this is already regulated by outside organizations, why are we trying to
Narrow
walk the
it.
line? Why wouldn't we just open the box a little bit further? These other groups are more nimble and have a better understanding of the implications of their numbers. Some, you threw around 7,000 square feet, you threw around different numbers. Those are done by the liquor boards or by the health department, and they have a reason for those additional numbers. If I can't sit here and tell you why I came up with a number, I shouldn't be here. So I would think that we would want to try and let the industry regulate itself a little bit. And many times these industrial areas, the implications for the community are the least concerning.
Right.
We sort of put them there because it doesn't matter quite as much, as long as it's nothing
Right.
soil-based or
Right.
something else. It really doesn't matter as much. They're usually shielded from the public view in many ways.
Right.
So if anything, this is a property that I don't have my eye on as being a huge concern for the community. Specifically, your property, there's split zoning in there. It was, and it's a
Right.
mixture of stuff back there, which indicates that a lot of the entrance ways as far as traffic and stuff, whether somebody's going to a commercial property, a retail center, or whether they're gonna go to the industrial portion of that property.
Flex
You
space.
still walk through
Right.
the same, you still drive through the same intersection. So we don't really know what you're doing back there, and it doesn't make a huge difference to us. So again, why are we regulating something, and maybe we should consider even
More broad.
a little further.
so.
It would eliminate a lot of variances as time goes by.
Well, they can't get a variance from the definition, so that wouldn't be variable.
49% of
The-
Oh, I thought you meant the 22.5.
No, I'm talking about the
SB 39.
49.
Yeah, okay.
And
But they could do something, I mean, I'll just give you an example. I own a brewery, I'm gonna rent two properties, I'm gonna put them next to each other, and I'm gonna do, I mean, there's two ways to skin this thing. So
Right.
he rents it to the same guy who owns two companies, who sticks the two businesses together, and now he's got 45. So,
And I understand the parking regulation discussion and that sort of
right, I
thing.
mean, there's a
You
couple of
know,
ways around this here.
Through the site plan process, I understand the parking regulation discussion and that sort of thing and how we would implement that, but it's somewhat akin to a medical cannabis dispensary where you have a very small portion that's actually open to the public and then a larger portion that's actually the back room, more pharmaceutical type office space, the giant vaults, that sort of thing. So, you know, it would be, I would envision it being presented on a site plan in a similar fashion, like this is the taste, you know, drawn out, this is the tasting room area, similar to what almost exactly what's presented to liquor board when we have to come in for a liquor license.
Don't they have to okay?
Exactly, the licensed premises. So I understand that, but I think that there's different ways to address that rather than by putting a percentage limitation on it.
What kind of square footage are you talking about? Just, are we 10, 50, 100, and where are we
I
general?
think it's 7,500.
Okay, so they're reasonably small places.
Some
We're not
of,
talking about massive.
it varies. I mean, are you familiar with Pub Dog on Route 31? That's the one in the county that jumps to mind as a brewery that's developed in the IG under the Alcohol Production Manufacturing. They have a small tap room, but Pub Dog's a pretty big brewery in terms of where they distribute
Presence,
to.
yeah.
It's presence, maybe not physically. Their space really is not that large. But their presence is larger. They're a Class 5 brewery license.
Right. So the things we also have to consider is, okay, I mentioned the story where we have one single person who opens a bunch of different businesses, sticks them together. But you also mentioned the fact that some of these breweries like to sort of join together, and the presence of one tends to maybe
Yes.
make it more palatable for somebody else to come
others,
in.
yeah.
So then we would have to consider the fact that maybe 3 totally unrelated businesses end up in the same area. And what's the implication of this? Does it change the landscape? Because as soon as it's zoned that way,
Right.
that's up to these guys to film it as
Right.
they choose.
But the liquor board will control that too.
Again, that's my point though.
Yeah.
That's exactly my
Currently-
point, is you have
Right.
these
Yes.
more restrictive outside organizations
Yeah.
that are really governing
These
this.
aren't looked at as like bars. I mean, I don't know if you've been in a brewery tasting room. I've seen children in their pajamas. And,
I think Pub Dog does like a dog night, 'cause they
Yeah,
have an
I mean,
outdoor
yeah.
area, you can
I
take
mean,
your
it just
dog.
flabbergasts me sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's a community gathering.
Well, they're
too.
just like German brew
So
houses when you go in.
it's not, I mean, we
Right.
keep bringing up dispensary, but it's, in the community in no way, shape, or form sees them
Views it
and
the
now
same,
as
right.
the same.
Land use characteristic wise may be the same.
Right.
Public view wise, definitely not the same.
Yeah, and I agree. If somebody else, like I was saying, like, do we tie it to the Maryland code? Do we even limit it to the 22.5 and let Maryland? Are we okay if we go above? And I don't know. I don't know what that implicates either. It's like, does it really make that big of a difference if they move to 40?
Would I know? If I,
I think the problem that I would encounter would be the zoning administrator's interpretation. The way that the small scale, and there, I don't believe that planning is suggesting that you adopt the 22,500 for this, but going forward under the new text,
So we have
although
at
correct me
least
if I'm
something?
wrong. But if they are, my response to that would be that if you say 22,500 is the capacity, and we have a Class 5 brewery license, so we have a greater capacity than that.
And that's what
the
Jay would
zoning
look at.
administrator is tasked with interpreting the code and sees that we have a greater capacity, then we can't operate there and we can't have a
Well, you
tasting
could still
room.
in the IR because you're allowing both brewery and microbrewery.
With the text we propose.
No, with the
No,
current.
with this proposal, the I-1 would allow brewery or a microbrewery. So in
Right.
the case of the I-1, you could have either.
Right,
The-
okay.
the
Yes,
commercial you
I
could
see what
not.
you're saying,
Yeah.
in the text we propose, not in the.
No,
not
no,
in the
text, the
new
planning commission.
proposed.
No,
Oh, in the new proposed
three
because
working
it's.
things.
yeah, there's the current code that only allows it in the
Well,
IG.
but.
Well, that's one
Okay.
thing.
There's 3 different things that
We're
we're looking
like
at.
on 2 different topics, the new text and the current text. But
See,
then,
I1
but
is
brewery
being-
small scale is,
No, it's the IG, the I2. So small scale is permitted in the I1 and regular brewery
Okay.
is also permitted in the I1.
Okay.
So anybody in the I1 would not have
could
the
do a
problem you're
brewery
talking
or a
about.
microbrewery, it would just be anybody in the I2.
Right, and Jay would look
Or
at
the
that because we
commercial.
asked him
Right.
what he would look at.
Yeah,
How would you
I also
determine
asked.
that? He would look at what you're licensed for. That's the only way he could do it.
To determine between small and.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
That actually
Correct.
brings up the issue for the I-1, 2, 3, right?
Well, it also brings up the issue where, if you, as you all are probably familiar, there's a lot of discussion in
I'm
the
sorry,
state
the C1,
legislature
2,
about
3.
breweries, and it's constantly changing, and people are constantly asking for changes to the text. So if it does ever change to 23,000, then
Right.
we can't have microbreweries anywhere.
See, my thought is that
might wanna
you
talk
reference the term from the state level
And allow the state to define.
and allow the state, as most currently defined by the state, you put the terms in quotes or code number or something.
Well,
and
it says Kelly has it proposed.
So when they change it, then we
As it
follow
It
theirs.
goes to 30 or 17.
Yeah.
They would be,
Right,
they'd be
right.
stuck with both.
It's
But
exactly.
again, people that actually focus just on this topic would be deciding these numbers, not us. It's already changed a couple of times, and it's different from state to state, area to area, so
Yeah.
why?
Even county to county, right?
Yeah,
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
Carroll County's
Allow the state to
definitely
define
different.
it, and let us reference the state's definition when it comes to microbrewery.
Yeah.
I don't want to associate any of this with cannabis. We didn't have conversations about cannabis right now.
They're
So
confusing,
let's take that completely off the table and out of the room, okay?
Just for the record, I didn't bring that up.
I brought it up.
So let's
For the
focus
record,
on
I brought it up.
And so then the other thing is the 49%.
So tell me more about the accessory use and why that's important if it's principal permitted, and if it's not principal permitted, why it shouldn't be.
the accessory.
Well, the accessory use, the whole 49%
Yeah.
only comes up if it's accessory,
'Cause it's
right? Because if it's
accessory.
principal
Yeah, right.
permitted, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah,
It's
Right.
principal permitted in the commercial,
but not in the.
but not in the
industrial.
I
The way
want.
you
Right.
defined it.
Well,
it
the
wouldn't make a
tasting.
difference.
So,
They
Right,
can
but
do
not
the
as
brewery,
principal.
but they can't have a
Yeah.
tasting
Right.
room.
Right.
And that's an accessory use is the tasting room.
Yes.
They can do the brewery, they can't have the other uses are accessory.
Yeah, why not?
why do we care?
Because, like she said, we're trying to keep the commercial, because a tasting room is, you're kind of similar to a when we first looked at that.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, and I mean, I think even in the 2 years we've been looking at the
Yeah.
commercial and the industrial, the breweries have
Yeah.
completely, because before, like the old brewer, like the ones in Howard County in the industrial areas, they're moving to other larger industrial spaces because their tasting rooms were too small.
Right.
You know, and so
Some of
I
them
think it's just completely boomed in the past couple of years.
And when you went through the use tables, you made restaurants and bars both prohibited in the industrial districts
Well-
unless they're in an industrial park, and then you allow for a percentage. So there's actually a few things going on. There's the commercial districts, the industrial
So I can
districts,
see not having
and
restaurant,
industrial park.
but is this considered a bar?
No.
Well, that's what I'm
tasting
saying,
room's not.
when you were talking about
Yeah.
the
There is
accessory
no
tasting
license for
room
a bar in
being
Carroll County.
not a principal permitted
There's
use.
no
it could
license
be
for a
bar.
bar in Carroll County right now, as it stands. They're all either grandfathered in. There's no actual bar county liquor license that you can obtain.
Huh.
Yeah. So,
So if we,
currently, that's a mood issue anyways.
we don't want them in the heavy industrial, but the restricted.
You can have a brewery, just no tasting.
Right, maybe you want, that's where you want
Maybe
like
you're-
Guinness.
Budweiser
like a
wants to come in
huge-
and
Right.
That's just an
But so when we
I-102.
look at industrial in the county, we're looking to make sure that the big guys
They're
have
manufacturing.
space to come in if they
Exactly.
want it.
Yeah,
And that
that's
the big
I-3.
That's
deals,
the I-2.
7,500 square feet, we don't really care if they're here or not. It's not gonna make a big difference as far as that's concerned. They're just filling existing space. But we wanted to carve out industrial space for the county to make sure that it was available on a large scale. But again, do we care if it's, what are the implications to the community? What do we care about from a community perspective, whether somebody's going in to do this or someone's going in to,
So you're saying allow a tasting room basically as part of the principal permitted?
I'm challenging us to figure out why we wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it now too, like, I guess,
What is
That's
the,
part of their business, I see what you're saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
if it's,
Customarily
it's pretty much,
incidental.
especially for the smaller ones, it's
Yeah,
pretty
you
much.
have to do that.
That's
You
how
do
they,
business. And
how,
that's the
how
same-
else can they do
That
it?
was the same way with the wineries, you know,
Yeah.
it's not an accessory use, it
Right.
is our business,
so,
right?
for example, the wineries in the ag area, we had an issue because they'd have these 2,000 people parties at the, and they would, and the implications to the community were significant, traffic and.
Right,
st-
but they have to have tasting rooms,
But this
that's
is-
actually part of their
Right.
business too, and so
But they
why
were
is this
expanding to
different?
the wedding events and stuff with the larger parties, and those had implications to noise and a whole
You're
bunch of other things. I can't come up with what the implications are if it has a tasting room. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, I think it
Well, we
seems
care.
similar to what a winery having a tasting
So in
room.
other words,
Would
don't
there be
spell it
parking
out.
implications?
There's no need to spell it out.
I don't know that we need to be overly
49%
restrictive in this area. It
We always
seems
said you could have a tasting.
regulated and,
I thought there was a concern about it becoming a bar or some, or.
A bar with an accessory,
Right. That was, I
brewery.
remember having those
Yes.
discussions.
That was
That was
where it
Tom's big-
originally,
But if
yeah.
it's-
how
but
would
if
that happen?
It's not necessary,
There-
then why spell,
yeah.
like you said, why
Right.
spell it out?
How, I guess I'm getting confused.
It's a
at what are-
tasting
what are
room,
we
not a bar.
defining? Yeah, but when
Yeah.
I go to the Guinness Brewery, I mean, it looks to me like they have a bar, but that's a tasting room.
Right.
Well, they do have a restaurant there, but that's completely
That's-
different.
yeah.
There is
That's
just,
like a third
there
party.
is no county liquor license currently that would allow them to sell liquor. It only
So
allows them to
bar
sell
is
beer
liquor.
or wine.
So
Yeah.
you can
Okay.
have a bar,
Right.
but it's not a bar because you're selling beer.
Even
Beer.
our distilleries
Their own beer.
currently,
Their own
under our
beer.
current
Their
county
own
liquor
beer.
laws, cannot have a tasting room because
Okay.
we have no provision just for that
So
includes
make it
liquor
easy,
for
don't spell
those
it out.
license.
I mean, what, I mean, why, as you said, why would we have to spell out the percentage unless we're directed to by the state somehow? And if we're not,
I think there's some strong concerns by the zoning administrator and development review about how they would interpret some of
And I
this.
guess
So,
we need to hear from.
Yeah, and that's-
we had, I just don't,
Yeah, we need to hear.
yeah,
from
so I was going to
I think you need to hear
suggest,
from them.
at our next meeting, we'll block off time to discuss this. We'll have some more internal discussions at concept team, but I think they really should be here at the table to tell you some of their concerns, and maybe they're warranted, and maybe they're just the unknown and how to handle it. So I think that would be,
Because the other thing to do is, if you're concerned about this, this spreading, you could limit square footage or some overall outside capacity or something, but you have to have a reason for coming up with that arbitrary number.
Does the liquor board have that limit? I know stores they do. We've got to
There's,
be
yes,
10,000.
yes, Class A has the 10,000.
Maximum, minimum requirement, what's the?
That's actually a state, that's not just
Right.
our
But what
county,
is the
but the
10,000?
state is
Can't be
10,000
bigger
square
than?
foot. A liquor store, a packaged goods store, cannot be bigger than 10,000. Currently, under the county local rules and regs, not imposed by the state, there is a limitation on the licensed premises for a Class D holder who would be any of your tap rooms that you see, okay? Anybody without food service has Class D, and we have a quota, currently, we have a quota on Class Ds in Carroll County, and currently, we have a 7,000 square foot licensed premise, which, the board is currently, just to be honest with you, is discussing the need for that, how things are changing with these breweries and with other Class D license holders, so that's an ongoing discussion that I've been having with the board, not
No,
for
I
St. John's, but
understand.
for a bunch of other people.
Different
But currently, there are those limitations on the Class D. We have there are only 3, you can have a Class A as a packaged goods store, you can have a Class B as a restaurant, which requires a certain amount of meals per day, literally a certain amount of vegetables that you
Yeah,
offer per
very
day. Yes, yes, seriously. And then the Class D, which allows for only beer and wine, and it's, there are other limitations on it, but that's your only option locally for like a tasting room.
The last level, the D, can they sell things that they don't produce?
They could, like Pub Dog couldn't sell wine. They have a beer and wine, but under their state manufacturer's license, if they're a brewery, they couldn't, like, depending on what type of license they have, they could not sell
Okay.
another, they couldn't sell
Right.
Coors.
So they're highly regulated.
That's sort of my
Yes.
point.
Yes.
Is that when I was a bartender
you
back in
should see,
college,
like, I had to
totally.
read this text before, when I started doing these Class 5s and stuff, I read it 10 different times. I talked to the comptroller's office. I have like, George Humbert, who owns Pub Dog Brewing, like on speed dial, because anytime I have a question, he's like go-to on this stuff,
Right.
because this is just on the 3 different types of breweries in the
Right.
state. Like, it's very intense, yeah.
Well, my takeaway would be try and tie the definitions to that moving target and only be restrictive in a way that actually has an effect on the community, a significant effect, and have it be quantifiable so that when development review or enforcement is trying to find out something that they don't have to have some figure they make up, that there's something that they can walk away with and know exactly what they're doing. I guess.
so we'll bring this up. Well, we have a concept team meeting coming up before our next planning commission meeting. We'll have those discussions, and then we'll make sure that those parties are here to be able to inform you about some of their concerns, which are, are valid, and to help them through the process too, about how they need to do their jobs, I think is a critical concern for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
But we do need to
Yes.
just decide this fairly quickly. I would
Yes.
imagine.
Hopefully at the next meeting.
Yeah.
We don't want to belabor
No,
this.
we don't want it. That's not our intention at all. We want to move forward as
And-
quickly as possible.
Not only that, 'cause
And then
it
this
could
will,
be
set-
Yeah, because we don't want to hold it
Synthesize
against
it and bring it
Yeah,
back
we don't
up
want to
again.
pull the buy one either.
no, and I think that would be the thing too, is that whatever is done here, we
We've
would
waited
have
long
to
enough.
move, and the commissioners will have to have that discussion then.
If we wait any longer, something else is
With,
gonna
with
come
how
out.
that's gonna affect, C1, C2, C3, I1, the whole bit.
but Ally, I do appreciate your focus on being less restrictive. If it's not necessarily, allowing those that are responsible, be responsible, and those restrictions dictate or direct our actions, as opposed to us trying to define it in addition to what's already been defined.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that a lot, and that makes it a lot easier.
Okay, so then we can get this resolved at our business meeting. and
Yes.
and you'll have
Yes, it'll be
zoning-
on the agenda.
And zoning will be here also.
Yes.
Okay. All right,
Good.
thank you.
Thank
Thank you, thank you.
I think, thank you for the education, truly.
Well, luckily I've been studying all this liquor
Well, I
laws
think it'll help
recently,
I
so.
will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kelly, thank you for all your knowledge on this. This is
Thank you.
huge.
Thank you.
It's like you said, last thing we want are variances on the
Yep.
two.
Well, that's
You were much
Sure,
more
Jacob, the one who crosses the barriers.
informative than your dad would have been.
Well, that's why he said, you're the brewery girl. I know nothing about this, so.
Much more succinct, too.
Yes.
Much more to the point and succinct.
Once again, I think practice makes perfect. Travel,
Keep the microphone.
All right, item 10, public comment, no public here. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Just me, I guess.
Take it in.